Watch this vidcast, or I'll gouge your eyes out.
Welcome back to Ghostman and Rivera's Horror Show podcast.
I'm Mike Ghostman Pickle.
And I'm James Rivera. We have a few new movies to discuss today, but before we get to that, we have to get to...
Horror Show News.
All right, we start off with the third annual Ghost-tober TV event is coming to the Travel Channel in October.
Chucky production postponed.
Freaky, an R-rated slasher version of Freaky Friday, is coming to theaters in November.
Candyman pulled from October release and indefinitely delayed to 2021. Boo.
And the filmmakers from this year's hit movie Host talk about a slew of horror projects on the horizon.
All right, so let's get started. So what's the first piece of news today, Mr. Michael?
All right, this one, I know you don't watch Travel Channel content as much as I do, but I love their paranormal stuff. Mm-hmm. Ghost Adventures and Paranormal Caught on Tape and shit like that. So they're having a third annual Ghost-tober event. And it's for the third year, the Travel Channel is showcasing special horror events in October, starting with, well, there's a bunch of stuff through the month, but I just chose the ones that interested me the most. Especially on October 26th at 6 p.m. Pacific is Amityville Horror House. It's part of their Shock Doc series of documentaries. They actually just did a documentary on the Warrens that I have recorded but I haven't watched yet. But it's part of that series, and it will feature archival footage and dramatizations to tell the story of both Ronald DeFeo and the Lutzes, including rare, previously unreleased interview with George Lutz, where he describes their last night in the house. Mm-hmm. I'm excited about that. And then on October 27th at 6 o'clock Pacific is another Shock Doc special called The Exorcism of Roland Doe. It's the real story behind the film The Exorcist. The documentary will explore the real story of the exorcism as well as the film's impact on pop culture. Then on October 29th at 6 is a Ghost Adventure special where they investigate the supposedly haunted Joe Exotic Zoo. I'm actually more excited about that than I was to watch Tiger King, that I still haven't watched yet. And then October 30th is something pretty interesting. At 5 p.m. is Portals to Hell, Frightmare in Connecticut. This is Ozzy Osbourne's son, Jack Osbourne. It's his show. So on this special, Ozzy's son, Jack, investigates Connecticut's most haunted home. Then later that night is something I'm really excited about, which is the Osbournes' Night of Terror. And on this one, Jack and Kelly Osbourne investigate the Heritage Square in Los Angeles, the haunted Heritage Square, while Ozzy and Sharon watch from base camp. That one should be pretty funny.
You know, I'm gonna be checking it out. It's kind of nostalgic for me. I feel like this generation has kind of forgotten that wouldn't you say the Osbournes were the first real reality TV stars, if you really think about it? That show was a pop culture phenomenon when it came out.
Yeah, the one that became a huge hit, yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. I'm not a fan of reality TV, but I love the Osbournes. So it was basically like Keeping Up with the Kardashians before Keeping Up with the Kardashians, but a hell of a lot better and more entertaining and more interesting than Keeping Up with the Kardashians. I grew up on the Osbournes, on Sharon, Jack, Kelly, so it'll be interesting to see them do something like this. So I'll be looking forward to it, just as somebody who grew up on that show. And I feel like people have forgotten how big the Osbournes were in pop culture and what a phenomenon that was at the time.
And I've loved Ozzy Osbourne ever since the 80s. Mm-hmm. I first discovered him in the 80s. That's the first metal that I'd ever heard in my life, so it's a special place in my heart for him. And I love the way he speaks. I love the way he kind of mumbles, and he almost sounds incoherent sometimes, but then he comes up with these really intelligent little gems that he comes up with. And they have a little show on the Travel Channel where it's called The Osbournes Want to Believe, and I guess that's why they're doing these specials for October.
I wasn't even aware of that.
Yeah, it's a show where Jack Osbourne just sits with his parents in their little theater room in their house, and he shows them different paranormal clips, and he asks for their take on it. So it's just a simple little show that them just sitting in their house and their son showing them videos. But they got some pretty hilarious episodes on that one too.
Like you pointed out earlier, I don't really watch too much of the Travel Channel, but this might give me more of a reason to tune in now. This might give me more
Yeah, for sure. And these documentaries look interesting. Like I said, I haven't watched the documentary on the Warrens yet, but I'll be interested to see if it shows me any information I don't already know.
Yep. Check these out. So, Chucky, the television series, is being postponed until 2021. So, I don't know if we talked about this on the show. It's going to be on the USA Network and Sci-Fi. A lot of productions right now are actually going through. Like, a lot of them are actually doing, but they're just trying to be safe. However, according to the producers, they're hoping that it's not actually going to delay the release date. So even though they're shooting it a little bit later, there's still a chance that it might come on time. So this doesn't necessarily mean that the series is going to be delayed for the fans, again, which it already was once. Lots of interesting stuff. We already confirmed, Jennifer Tilly has confirmed that she's going to be coming back as the bride. So we know that for a fact.
Nice.
We know that the main character of the series is going to be a young boy who is secretly gay, and he's in the closet. And this will be interesting for Don Mancini because he has never actually tackled this in any of the Child's Play movies or any of the franchise, despite the fact that he himself is gay. So he'll be exploring that concept. So I guess Chucky is going to be using the angle where he knows the kid's secret to kind of like terrify him or to mess with his head and to like kind of get inside and toy with him. So this looks like it's going to be an interesting angle to the series. They're really excited for it. They're hoping it doesn't delay anything. They're going to try to tie in everything from the movies as well, introducing completely new characters. And Don Mancini negotiated a contract. A lot of people were worried that since Chucky was going to be on pay cable, he was going to be a little neutered or watered down, censored. Because Chucky is known, as you know, Michael, he's a foul-mouthed little fucker. He cusses. He's impolite. He's crude. So Don Mancini worked out a contract where they get 8 to 10 fucks per episode.
Nice.
So Chucky will still be cursing. He said that was very important to him. It's very much a part of the character, the foul-mouthed attitude. So Don Mancini made sure to work it into the contract that he doesn't have to soften Chucky down, soften his language down. So everything I hear, I keep getting more excited.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was already excited about a Chucky TV series, but now that I hear that they're adding some more flavor to it and a different types of angle that he can explore, especially being a gay man, and it's something that he hasn't explored before in the franchise. That'll be interesting to see what he does with that.
Yeah, be very interesting. It'll be very interesting. Give us a new perspective. And like you said, it's a fresh angle for the Child's Play franchise.
And more Tiffany. More Tiffany is always good.
Yes. Jennifer Tilly. Happy birthday, by the way. Jennifer Tilly just turned 62 a couple of days before we recorded this podcast. And my God, that woman has not aged in the past 20, 25 years.
Yeah.
She is 62, and she looks like she's in her late 30s to me still. Late 30s, early 40s. How the fuck you do it? I don't know. But kudos to you, Jennifer Tilly. Kudos to you.
That's a beautiful 62 right there.
Oh, yeah. That's a beautiful older lady. Jennifer Tilly. Also, just a little interesting tidbit for the fans. Jennifer Tilly doesn't really act anymore. The only time she comes out is to portray the bride because she has such a big fan following and she's dedicated to it. But she's a professional poker player, high stakes. She's won almost like $1 million on one game. She's really good. So her career lately has been high stakes poker. Pretty interesting.
So she doesn't even need to play Tiffany. She's just playing it because she loves it.
Yep. Exactly.
And you can tell too. She embraces that character. You can tell she loves it. She owns it.
Yes, she does. She does. Jennifer Tilly.
Very cool. That's like our friend Gil, the owner of Shockfest. He makes a lot of money with gambling and stuff.
Hey, if you know how to do it, good for you. I'm not one of those people though.
Yeah, stuff like that can fund your other projects and shit.
Yep.
So our next news story, I'm on the fence about. I mean, it looks really fun, but it could be a clunker. It's Freaky, an R-rated slasher version of Freaky Friday. And I'm wondering why nobody has done this yet. It's from director Christopher Landon. He did Happy Death Day 1 and 2, which I didn't like that much, but he did do Paranormal Activity, the marked ones, which I loved. And it stars Vince Vaughn as a sadistic serial killer who targets high school student played by Catherine Newton as his next victim. Here's a synopsis. When the butcher's mystical ancient dagger causes him and Millie to wake up in each other's bodies, Millie learns that she has just 24 hours to get her body back before the switch becomes permanent and she's trapped in the form of a middle-aged maniac forever. The only problem is, she now looks like a towering psychopath who's the target of a citywide manhunt, while the butcher looks like her and has brought his appetite for carnage to homecoming. The butcher looks like her and has brought his appetite for carnage to homecoming. With some help from her friends, Millie races against the clock to reverse the curse while the butcher discovers that having a female teen body is the perfect cover for a little homecoming killing spree. The film was produced by Blumhouse and Universal and hits theaters November 13th.
Is that the synopsis the studio gave?
Yeah.
With a little help from her friends?
Yeah.
And had Beatles on the soundtrack? That's what I want to know.
Huh?
The important
I know, right?
Are the Beatles going to be on the soundtrack, and are they going to use that song? I'm with you. I'm surprised that this was never actually made into a movie before. The concept seems kind of so obvious. In hindsight, when you stop and really think about it, that it's right to be made for a horror movie. This could go either way. I mean, it could be a bad idea. It could be a good idea. I think it's all depends on the execution. And I know too little about it to say anything. I did see the first Happy Death Day. Finally caught it. Did not like it. I don't have interest in seeing the second one. Marked Ones was okay, but we'll see. I think this is a much fresher concept than the other works that Christopher Landon has done, so I think that's kind of a benefit. You don't have any, it's not going to have to conform to any type of formula or anything like that.
Yeah, and Happy Death Day 2 is quite a bit worse than the first one. I mean,
it has its fans, though. There is large segments of the horror community that really do appreciate those films. We're just not part of it.
Yeah. The first one, like I said before, it is a good comedy. I like it as far as a comedy, but it's a bad horror film. The horror elements are not good in it, I don't think. And I think a lot of that stems from the PG-13 rating.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully with an R rating, this guy can get a good balance between the comedy and the horror. Mm-hmm. Because it does look like in the trailer, it does have the same type of comedy in the vein of Happy Death Day, but it does look better to me. But like I said, I just hope that he balances the horror well, because like I said, the Happy Death Day movies do not have good horror elements, I don't think, at all.
Yeah, I agree. Another sad piece of news. Candyman has been pulled from the October release and indefinitely delayed to 2021. I'm a little upset about this, but you know what? I think I'm okay. I want to see this on a big screen for one thing. It was possibly my most anticipated horror movie of the year. I'd have to really think about it, but it was probably the most anticipated horror movie of this year. I was looking forward to it. I was so hyped to see Candyman. We should have got it a couple months ago. But you know what? I'm okay if it means we're going to get it in theaters and when it's a little bit safer, I feel more comfortable going out in large groups of people. I think I'm okay with this decision. And one thing that I do think is interesting is a lot of studios, for films that they're delaying, a lot of studios are just going to release them or put them onto VOD and do kind of what you'd expect in this era. Universal is going out of its way not to release this digitally or on video. They want this to be released theatrically. So the executives at Universal really believe that they have something special on their hands, that they want to make sure that they hold off until theaters can open. They do not want to spread this movie out until they can actually show it properly. And that's good to hear, because studios are aware of the quality of their products and make decisions based on that. And studios don't make this type of decision unless they believe that they have a quality product on their hands that is going to be popular.
And it shows the theater experience is still important to them, and they're not just thinking of the bottom line. Well, they are thinking of the bottom line too, because they're thinking about the money they'll make from theaters. But still, they're delaying it that far just to accommodate a theater release. I think that's pretty cool.
So do I. So kind of sucks. Was really looking forward to it, but hey, I think we've all had to accept everything that we were looking forward to. Everybody has had have everything pushed back. So we just march on.
Yeah, I mean, then 2020 was looking really promising as far as the horror genre with all these releases, but then even with a lot of them postponed till next year, I think it's shaping up to still be a pretty good year.
Yeah, especially considering we have to judge it by what this year is. It's a pandemic year. So judge by the year of a pandemic, pretty good, not normal. I don't think that the normal standards would apply for this year for what's good and what's bad. On the other hand, it might mean we'll get an overloaded 2021.
Yeah, I think so, because I think it's making the horror genre even more popular because it's showing how bankable it is no matter what's going on in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Horror is a bankable genre.
Yep, yes it is. So,
and speaking of bankable horror, the popular movie this year, Host, the filmmakers did a interview with Bloody Disgusting, and they had a lot to say about a lot of their new projects coming up, which is quite a few. So the Host director, Rob Savage, and co-writer Jed Shepard talked about their upcoming films. Here's what Rob Savage says about their next film. It's set present day in this weirdness that we're in at the moment. And if Host was kind of our lockdown movie about the claustrophobia of lockdown, this new movie is about the horror of going back outside, back into an unsafe world and fear of other people and how we reconcile that while, the danger is still present and the virus is still out there. It's not a virus movie and it's not a pandemic movie, but it plays on that kind of paranoia and uncomfortable atmosphere. And then they wouldn't give any further details, but they said that they were watching Ty West's House of the Devil and The Innkeepers for inspiration, as well as It Follows. So that's really promising. And it's more than 10 times the budget of The Host and 10 times the scares, they say. They're also working on a women in prison movie with writer Teresa Sutherland, who
a women in prisons movie? A women in prison movie?
Women in Prison movie written by Teresa Sutherland. She did The Wind, which is on Showtime, which looks pretty good. I haven't seen it yet. So it's both a prison break film and a supernatural horror film that's been called The Conjuring Behind Bars.
The Conjuring Behind Bars. It's funny. The first project that you mentioned, I actually was looking forward to, just based on your description of it, because I do think a post-pandemic movie is a good idea because it kind of plays on a lot of the fears that people have right now, and that angle doesn't sound like I don't know, it doesn't sound like exploitation or you're just exploiting the era. It sounds more like you're exploring different ideas for horror. I think that makes sense. The thing that really got me excited, you said a women in prisons film?
Yeah.
They're coming back? Isn't that like a dead... All right, I have a question for you. And this is a question that Martin Scorsese proposed to Joe Bob Briggs. This is a question. Are women in prison films a subgenre of the prison film, or are they a genre unto themselves?
That's hard to say. I'd say a genre in itself.
That's what Scorsese thinks.
Yeah, because you go all the way back to the women in prison, even television shows like in the 70s and shit.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting because I actually read recently about a conversation that Joe Bob Briggs had with Martin Scorsese on the set of Casino, because he asked him, so do you think women in prison films are a subgenre of the prison movies or a genre unto itself? Because Martin Scorsese says, I personally think that they're a genre unto themselves.
It's such a different dynamic between women in prison and men in prison.
Yeah. They don't produce the same types of movies. So this is going to be like exploitation, a throwback to like those Jack Hill, Pam Grier, Sid Haig women in prison exploitation films.
No, I think they're going for more realism.
Realism? Okay.
And that they want to go for the real deep scares. So it sounds like it's going to be fun, but it sounds like they're really going to work on making it realistic and scary.
So this will be a women in prison film that takes itself seriously then.
Yeah.
That'll be something new. That's something different. I will say that.
Yeah, and he's the director said he's always wanted to see a prison break movie that has horror mixed in with it, and then the women's prison makes it another whole different dynamic.
Yep.
But
these are really cool. I really enjoyed The Host.
Yeah.
I thought it was such a clever way to use the limitations of what we're dealing with right now to make a movie, and I think they were really successful at that.
Yeah, well, simultaneously, while they're doing these other projects, they're also still developing the Supernatural film with Sam Raimi.
Hmm.
And they wouldn't give any details. They're just saying they've been going back and forth with him a lot on Zoom, and they've been doing table reads with them,
Hmm.
where he was talking about how excited that's what they go for when they go for these Zoom table reads with Sam Raimi. They wait for something they write to make him excited, and that really gets them going and inspired. So they said they've excited him quite a few times in these table reads. So that sounds promising, and it sounds really promising that Sam Raimi is that close with the process from the beginning.
Yes, it is.
So I think that shows it's going to be good. And besides all that, they are already developing their second film with Blumhouse and a TV project. So they got a lot of shit going on. Like now the stuff with Blumhouse
genre.
Yeah, the stuff with Blumhouse, it's not like the host dropped and they got all these opportunities. They had already had this opportunity with Blumhouse before, because based on their short films. So hosts just put them in the stratosphere, and they can do anything they want to now. And you got to hear these filmmakers talk. They are excited about what they're doing, about their opportunity.
I imagine hosts just probably confirmed for the studios who had already signed them on for all these projects. They probably saw the success of that app and go, "Yep, we were right. We made the right decision getting those guys." So all of this sounds interesting. All of it.
Yeah, they definitely have a lot of passion for the genre and a lot of confidence.
Yes.
They keep saying that everything that they're doing, no one has ever done it before, and they've never seen it before. They're going to blow people's heads off with this stuff. So we'll see if their words come true.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
I always root for smaller filmmakers like that who get a big opportunity like this.
So what are our films for the day, Mr. Michael?
We have some pretty fascinating films to talk about today, and they're all fairly new, especially Random Acts of Violence. It's from 2019. It's written and directed by Jay Baruchel, who is the actor from This Is the End. I thought he was the biggest douchebag in This Is the End, and I was concerned about this movie because he plays himself. He plays a kind of a version of himself in This Is the End, and I thought he was a huge douche. But this one I enjoyed.
Movie, though, by the way.
Yeah.
And that is relevant. For if you haven't seen This Is the End, the comedy about all the celebrities locked in James Franco's mansion trying to survive the apocalypse, it does have horror elements in it.
Yeah, and that's
I call it a horror comedy. Yeah, mind you, I would not call it a horror comedy, but there's definitely horror elements and some good horror parodies in there. You can tell it was made by people who watch horror movies. I'll put it that way.
And Jonah Hill's in that, and he plays a version of himself too, and he's a huge dick.
No, none of them were concerned with that, with making themselves look good.
So, Random Acts of Violence is about a comic book writer who begins to realize that a string of grisly murders closely resemble his comic book slasher man. It stars Jesse Williams from Cabin in the Woods in a really good performance, Jordana Brewster from The Faculty in another great horror turn for her, and Jay Baruchel, the writer-director from This Is the End, is in it, and Neam, is that how you spell her name? That's how you say her name? Neam Wilson. And then Simon Northwood plays a really good killer.
Nia Rome,
okay.
Nia Rome. Yeah. So what did you think of this one, Michael?
Well, the first thing I thought, okay, the style and energy of the film is apparent right away. Like you see the energy punches you in the face, the animation, the animated beginning, the pulsing like new wave type music. And then when it gets into the story, the first thing I thought is Hart Fisher from the American Horrors Channel. Because he did a comic book about Jeffrey Dahmer. And there was a big backlash over it. He was on Sally Jesse Raphael. People were bitching out about it. All these parents groups came down on him. So I think this almost demonizes guys like him.
You think so?
It demonizes guys like him, but it also it glorifies the violence and demonizes it at the same time. That's what it kind of made the movie a bit random for me.
That's why it's called Random Acts of Violence. So, with regards to that, here's another thing. For those of you who are interested in Hart Fisher, we actually did, I think it was like somewhere in the 40s. It was our 40th, possibly episode 40 or 41. We did a 2-hour-long interview with Hart Fisher, who is a lot like the main character in Random Acts of Violence. And in fact, I wouldn't be surprised to find out if parts of it were actually based on Hart Fisher. And pretty convinced that they had to be somewhat aware of Hart's Jeffrey Dahmer comic books and Boneyard Press. So check that out if you're interested. I actually read an interview with Jay Baruchel, and he said he's a big fan of the horror genre. Like, he's very enthusiastic and he's very into it. He wanted to make a horror movie that that gets everything that he loves, like, say, about slashers, the brutality, the colorfulness of it, that still questions whether or not it's right or wrong. Because he said as a horror fan, he occasionally questions himself whether or not this is justified or not, and he always reminds himself that it's just a movie. He said he thought it might be interesting to explore some of his conflicting feelings about it in a movie, because on the one hand, he does feel that it is just entertainment and it is harmless. On the other hand, he feels like it's worth asking the questions to find, well, maybe if we investigate, does this actually do harm? I don't think he comes to a definitive conclusion in the movie, because I don't think he's trying to say good or bad. I think he was just doing it to try to raise questions and kind of raise questions about his own fandom while celebrating it at the same time. So there's things about this that I can definitely see it would rub horror fans the wrong way, but I don't think it's meant necessarily in a bad way. It's more of a self-interrogation. Like, is what we do wrong? Is what we do, does it have a certain type of influence on society?
Well, to me, it almost has too much to say. Between the high concept and the drama and the character interaction, and then making it a fun exploitative type of movie, and that balance gets a little sloppy sometimes, but it always redeems itself. Just when you think it's going to go off the rails, some new scene happens or some new development that brings it back around, and holds your interest.
See, I don't want to give away the twist, because like I said, we don't give away plot twist here on the show, because we think it's important for audiences to discover this on their own. But one thing that I do find interesting about the twist, and this is where something else that you said comes into play, it might be saying too many things in one film, because you said it's supposed to be interrogating it and celebrating it at the same time. And then at the end, I don't know if it's a conclusion, but it seems to infer the idea that maybe it's not hurting. Maybe maybe sick fantasies and movies actually stop killers from acting it out themselves, because I guess their appetite for violence is quenched by what they see on the screen or by what they read in entertainment. The idea that it could actually soothe the psychotic, or the idea that you ever heard the saying that art is meant to disturb the comfortable and disturb people who are comfortable and comfort the people who are disturbed. So I get that kind of feeling off of it a little bit towards the end. It seems like he's exploring a lot of different ideas while not being sure that he actually has the answer to any of these questions. He's just tossing out a lot of possibilities, and maybe he does a little bit too much, because it's such a small movie to be asking that many philosophical questions about the nature of horror and the nature of violence. But I do have to say, I really do admire the ambition of it. I appreciate what he's going for. And I think that it signals Jay as a really talented filmmaker. This is a type of movie that you only make when you're excited to be making a horror movie. Like, you could tell that it was made by filmmakers who were giddy at the prospects of making a movie. You could tell it's like, ooh, let's pull out the stylistic chops. Let's do the animation. Let's do the interesting color scheme. Let's do all the good angles. You could tell he put a lot of excitement and energy into the actual making the film. And I think that energy is palpable.
Yeah, and when it's brutal, it's really brutal.
Oh,
and
yeah.
When it's fun, it's really fun.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but when it's dramatic, it's really dramatic, and it almost lost me a couple times. All the way up to the last couple minutes, I thought, okay, if that's the way it's going to end, I'm going to walk away from this, and I'm not going to be satisfied. But even though the ending wasn't inherently satisfying, it was satisfying to me for some reason, and I can't quite put my finger on why it ended up being satisfying when I felt it wasn't going to be.
I feel the same way too. And the response to this movie from everything that I've read has mostly been negative, and I actually do understand the complaints and the criticisms. However, I have to be honest, for all the film's flaws, and it is a flawed movie, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was the work of somebody who shows signs of talent. Like, I want to see Jay Baruchel make more horror movies now, just based on what you've seen. And with regards to the brutal violence, these are some of the most fucked up slasher movie scenes I've seen in a long time. And I think what makes them so brutal is that they're not sadistic in a movie like, say, like a classic slasher like The Prowler, or even something like Terrifier. You know, like the sadism of it is just brutal and hard hitting. It's almost like watching a train wreck. Like the first attack, which is on a few group of people when the stab.
Yeah, those stabs, dude. Oh.
Like, it was like I was actually there in the moment. Like, he stages those slasher scenes with amazing effect. Like, Jay is really, based on just this movie, he's really, really good at staging kill scenes, because it made my heart jump. It gave me anxiety, and it felt brutal and real. The type of feeling of what it would be like to actually be there while it's happening, not comprehending and not being able to react fast enough to the swift and brutal violence that's unfolding before your eyes. I thought the reactions were pretty realistic. It was tense, and it really made my heart race. Well, I will say that he really figured out a way to stage slasher movie scenes in a way that makes them seem brutal, realistic, visceral, frightening, and very in your face.
And I like how it seemed like the killer was reveling in the killing, but the director wasn't.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
The director wanted you to feel it, wanted you to feel like it was real, but he wanted to show you that also that the killer was reveling in it, but he wasn't.
Yeah. So I was kind of shell-shocked by the first scene. Not the first scene, but the first scene of slasher movie violence in here.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, that was really effective. A lot more effective than I expected it to be.
Well, overall, it's a very interesting directing style, and it feels original. And I think that's what's going to turn a lot of people off. If something feels completely original, like nothing they've ever seen before, they're not going to like it. And it has elements of other films, elements of other filmmakers, but not that much. Like it had a Jennifer Lynch vibe to me. Did you feel that?
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit. He has, if Jennifer Lynch had more of a sense of humor.
Yeah, exactly. Like the meanness of Jennifer Lynch's films was there, but it had the element of fun that Jennifer Lynch's films don't have.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I was really surprised by it. And you know what? I really liked Jesse Williams a lot in the lead role. I thought he gave a really good performance. I thought it was layered. I thought it was complex. And I really felt the character development and the character reveals with him kept me fascinated because he keeps having these flashbacks throughout the movie, these very strange colorful images. Some of it reminded me a little bit of like Mandy or Color Out of Space. I wouldn't say it's as, I don't know, in your face with that style, but I could see it hinting towards something like that, or heading that way.
Well, for a while, it seems like he was leaning heavily on demonizing the violence and demonizing people like this main character who glorify slashers, real life serial killers like this. And then he gets ambushed by the radio host. That scene kind of pissed me off, and that happens. That's something that I don't know about you, but I would never do that. Mm-hmm. Bring a guest on just so we can ambush them and tell them how wrong what they do is. Mm-hmm. But then you get also, when you see that the killer is imitating the comic books, the way his wife, played by Jordana Brewster, the way she lectures him, that really rubbed me the wrong way. Mm-hmm. Like, it wasn't him doing the killing. Somebody copied his stuff, but it wasn't his fault for writing it.
It wasn't, but that is a realistic response, because that is a realistic response. Well, it does. I get why it would rub, and of course it's going to really piss horror fans a lot because it can feel condescending from a certain angle. I also feel that that's the realistic reaction of a wife who might be fed up with it, who might just say, this is your fault. You're the one who created all these killings and they're copying you, and this would never have happened if it wasn't for you. So I think that's kind of a real reaction, right or wrong.
And that reminds me, the Jordana Brewster character has a lot of real reactions, I think, right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Where the reactions she has to the killing starting and them being, stalked by the killer, and they get in a situation that's hopeless, and the way she reacts to that. Mm-hmm. And then when it comes down to the climax, that reaction she has when she says,
she basically says, I love you, let's not live our last moments like in fear or in sadness or despair.
Yeah, but then her I won't scream for you line. Mm-hmm. There's something about just that line and the way she delivered it really stuck with me. Like, I kept thinking about it after the movie when she looks at him and says, I won't scream for you.
And what? It takes away the idea that she's a victim, that she refuses to let this guy tear her down and make her cry and beg for her life or everything. She went out with, she's basically saying that she wants to go out with some sort of dignity, that she's not going to sit there. And I think you don't see that very often in slasher movies. A victim who is probably going to be a victim, but you're not sure, just saying it and refusing to be the damsel in distress, refusing to be that by standing up and accepting it with dignity.
Yeah.
That's something you don't see very often in slasher movies, and I think that's why that moment rings with you, because you don't really, like I said, you don't see that too often.
And there's something I didn't quite get, because the film doesn't hold your hand as far as story goes. Mm-hmm. But was the wife a journalist that was studying it with an emphasis on the victims? Is that why she was talking to him so much about the killer? Okay.
Yeah, she was a journalist, and she was just covering it from a different angle than he covered his comic book. Because his comic book is supposed to be loosely inspired by a real serial killer, and kind of imitates a lot of what he actually did in real life. And the wife is just spending her time trying to get the stories of the victims.
Yeah, and did you get little hints of kind of house that Jack built too? Especially with the human sculptures.
Yeah, I could see that. I could definitely see that. There's definitely Jay Baruchel's definitely got an imagination when it comes to staging sadism, and when it comes to horrible tableaus. Kind of reminded me of some of the stuff that I saw in True Detective season 1. Some of ritualistic style killing, some of the images that you see. It's quite a bit more twisted than I anticipated. Overall, I actually was not expecting much out of this movie because of all the negative things I heard about it, because of what I've read about it, and because before I started it, I was already aware that a lot of horror fans felt that it was poking the genre the wrong way, that it was kind of condescending. So I kind of went into this movie somewhat aware of how people were perceiving it and reacting to it. And I think I had a completely different reaction, where I could see some of the complaints being valid, and I do think it's definitely an imperfect movie, but it's so exciting and fresh that I couldn't help but be engaged by it the entire time.
Well, another thing that rubbed me the wrong way as far as demonizing this type of culture is the book signing, with the comic book signing. When they made the fans, when the fans made like a sculpture based on the comic book, they made the fans look really sleazy and perverted and seedy.
Yeah. But, I mean, you kind of had to have scenes like that if you were trying to get the point that you're trying to get across with this movie.
Yeah.
I think it kind of teeters on the edge of being condescending to horror fans, but I don't think it actually is or goes full.
Yeah, like every time it explores something like that, it almost
balances it back with the counterpoint of why that
exactly.
It's almost like Jay Baruchel is using this movie to have like a dialogue with himself, like a back and forth. Like you could see scenes that spell, no, this is wrong and it's immoral. No, it's actually not. It's this. You could see that it's him very much wrestling with his love for the horror genre.
Yeah, and then the strategically placed animation. That's not just animation. It's animation that looks like it come right out of a comic book.
Oh, really
It-
good stuff. Really interesting flourishes like that. Do you know what I mean? And I also don't expect movies from actors to be this cinematic. I always
Yeah.
caught off guard when actors make movies that are this visual or this much based on the visual schemes. So I was kind of taken aback by that Jay Baruchel is really taking the filmmaking aspects very seriously.
Well, I wanted to point out one small scene that really impressed me. That it's another one I can't quite put my finger on why, but it's where it's after the book signing, and it's after some of the animation and stuff, and it's the main character talking outside of the hotel room to the artist character, and they're out there talking, and then all of a sudden there's like a yeah
Yeah, Todd.
and there's a noise at the dumpster.
Mhm.
Something about the score in that scene and the things they were talking about, and then that little sound at the dumpster scared the shit out of me. It's one of those like false jump scares that I don't usually like, where it makes you jump, but it's nothing really. But it really made me jump, and right after I jumped, like I felt this panic, and I felt this fear.
See, that's why I don't see it as a false jump scare, though. Because I think false jump scares, what they do is they get the audience primed up, they get you waiting, and once the jump scare hits, you kind of relax, like, because it's over, and you realize it's fake, and then they hit you with the real scare because you're in a relaxed state of mind. This does the opposite. The fake jump scare only serves to up your anxiety instead of relieving it. I think that's what makes it more effective.
And it started making me feel this panic. I guess because he made me think that another real scare was coming up right away, I think.
How generic is that name, Slasher Man? That is his generic slasher movie killer. And you know, it's so generic, I'm surprised that nobody's ever used it before. Slasher Man.
Yeah.
It's so simple, it's so cheesy, but it's effective, and it gets the point across really fast. It's a Slasher Man.
And it looks like a pretty hardcore comic, too.
Mm-hmm. I would definitely check it out.
And the movie feels dangerous, too. It feels like anybody could die at any time, because some of the main characters die much earlier in the story than I think they're going to. I think there's going to be some kind of stalking sequence, some kind of slashing, typical slasher sequence, and all of a sudden that person's fucking gone. Like, holy shit, anybody could die at any moment. I love movies like that. And another scene that really affected me the most, I won't give too many details, I'll just tell you, when Todd wakes up in the hotel room and the cop's lights are on outside, and then he opens the door.
Oh, yeah.
And what he sees on the ground outside the door, holy shit. So there's quite a few images and quite a few scenes and sequences that really stick in my mind throughout the whole thing.
You know, I actually want to watch this again. I feel like a couple more viewings could help me to organize some of my thoughts that I have on this movie.
Yeah. Well, the one thing it kind of almost went off the rails for me is the flashback that he continues to have through the whole thing. Like, it's this weird color correction to it. And then you see that it's on Christmas, and there's a Christmas song playing, and the Christmas song starts slowing down. And we've been seeing a lot of that lately. A lot of taking like joyful songs and slowing them down for horror effect. I don't know. I think that's where I was too aware of the style, I think.
Okay. I didn't mind it. I liked it.
Because I like style, but I don't like it forced in there. That seemed a little forced, but still, just when I thought it was going to lose me, that's another thing would happen that would bring me back in. So it's not really a complaint. It's just
criticism.
Yeah, finding little criticisms in a movie that I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
Overall.
So I think it's safe to say we both like this movie quite a bit, despite tiny reservations here and there.
Oh, and I saw another nod toward the end in the climax. Happy birthday to me. The table of victims.
Oh yeah, yes, definitely. You could tell that Jay grew up on slasher, and that's another thing. Happy Birthday to Me, is that a Canadian or an American slasher? I think
I'm
that's
thinking it's Canadian.
I think that's a Canadian one. I've had these discussions with you recently, and not actually on the podcast. It's interesting. The slasher movies from the 80s tend to be like either from the US or from Canada, and the 80s slasher movies tend to be quite different from the Canadian slasher movies. They have different aims, and it seems like they're trying to achieve something different with each style. But I wonder if that's a nod to the slasher films of his homeland, of his country.
Maybe. Like I said, there's a lot of nods in this, but it never commits to any kind of being derivative at all.
No.
I think it shows a lot of inspirations, but nothing derivative. I thought it was really original.
And the last thing I want to say about the movie, I have one more thing to say. Is it safe to say that the slasher movie is officially back?
I think so.
I think so too. I think it's safe to say. I don't think it's obviously this is not going to be like the 80s where a wave of slashers come out, but I feel like slasher movies are solidly alive now. They're back in the game.
Yeah, and I think I figured out, just talking to you now, why I was satisfied with the ending when it almost ended unsatisfyingly. The whole "fuck your ending" thing. When the main character says "fuck your ending," it shows that it's going in a direction where I think I know it's going to go, and then that shows me that no, I'm going to end this in a different way. I'm going to do something different with this. I'm not going to be typical. And in any point in this movie, am I going to be typical? And I like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then you have the narration from the beginning comes around full circle, and you have the narration at the end, which changes at the end into random acts of violence. And I thought it brought the whole story to a satisfying ending. So for me, it was focused, random, focused, random, focused, the end. That was this movie for me.
Befitting of a title that has random in the name.
Yeah.
So this one right now is available on Shudder. I believe it's some kind of early release. I know it was made in 2019, but I count it as a 2020 movie because audiences are not seeing it until now. So to me, it's a 2020. It's a brand new movie. It's on Shudder right now. Shudder has it listed as an early release. So I don't know what the situation is or if they're going to get it full time. But check it out if you have a Shudder subscription. Watch it. And it's a short movie. It's less than an hour and a half, and it breezes by like that too.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, especially for such a dramatic movie and such a dialogue-driven movie. It had a lot of other shit in it. A lot of fun shit, a lot of slasher elements.
I think it's because there's no fat on the movie. It's very trim. Like, it gets to it sets out to do a bunch of different things, and it's like Jay is ticking those things off one at a time. There's no time for the movie to get bloated or to become too lopsided or to explore. Like, just when you think the movie is taking an angle that you don't like, it switches out of it. It doesn't stay there long enough for it to even have much of an effect on you. It's the result of it being such a trim movie.
And there was a couple times where I felt, oh shit, we're already at this part of the story? Cool. It just seemed to fly by.
Yeah. So it's fast-paced, easy to watch, and won't take up too much of your time. Check it out, horror fans. Check it out, slasher fans especially. Want to see a good, new, fresh take on the slasher genre that kind of deconstructs slashers in a way that doesn't feel like Scream or Cabin in the Woods. That's another good thing about this. It kind of deconstructs the movie without ever feeling like it's taking inspiration from Scream or Cabin in the Woods. And I think that in and itself is an accomplishment, because it is tough to deconstruct the slasher film without somehow inadvertently making some sort of reference to either.
And being so high concept without being hokey.
Exactly.
So the next one we watched, you suggested Random Acts of Violence, and I hadn't seen it yet. So when you suggested that, I suggested we pair it with The Terror of Hallows Eve from 2017. So it's fairly new. It completely flew under the radar. But I suggested this because it also involves someone's drawn characters coming to life. And it actually has no similarities to Random Acts of Violence besides that. Where Random Acts of Violence was a high concept that never got hokey, the Terror of Hallows Eve is a high concept that does get hokey sometimes, but it's still a lot of fun. It's directed and co-written by Todd Tucker. Now, what's interesting about this director, he's a special effects makeup artist for Pit and the Pendulum, Subspecies, Bram Stoker's Dracula, Mrs. Doubtfire, The Mask, Darkness Falls, Apocalypto, Curious Case of Benjamin Button, Watchmen, and Ouija Origin of Evil. And he also did special effects for Idle Hands, Sons of Anarchy, and Veronica recently for Glenn Danzig.
This guy has a career then.
Oh, yeah.
Accomplished career, actually. That's impressive.
And I was not surprised when I seen this, because when I saw this movie, I was like, this is a low-budget movie done by professionals. Mm-hmm. I could tell, like, it was almost like a concept that a beginner would do, but it was handled with professionalism. And the screenplay was by actor-writer Zach Ward, and he's been in tons of acting roles, but he hasn't written a whole lot. So that shows why the writing wasn't spot on. But it's about a 15-year-old boy who's severely beaten by bullies, and when wishing for revenge, drops some of his blood and falls into a jack-o'-lantern and unleashes the trickster and the terror of Halloween. But I was a little confused. It said based on true events. This is when you take a little bit too much liberty with the based on true events moniker. But
is that moniker? I don't think it should be applied to something this fantastical and out.
Yeah, exactly.
You kind of kill like that. I agree. That was dumb. You should have never. It works for a movie like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre because everything in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre could conceivably happen, and it actually is loosely based on the crimes of Ed Gein. So there's some truth there. Fargo, the movie Fargo.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's not a true story, and it's a little bit far-fetched, but it's not outside the realm of impossibility. This movie, you're making a stretch when you want to slap based on true events on a movie.
Yeah, exactly.
It does not work.
But it really had a really standout performance in the lead character, Tim, played by Caleb Thomas. I looked up this kid. He has done 112 projects in his young career.
112?
And, yeah, 112 projects, and I don't think I've even heard of any of them. So somebody put this kid in a bigger movie. He deserves it. And then Annie Reed plays April, the girl he has a crush on. And then the great Doug Jones plays the Scarecrow and the Trickster. Mm-hmm. Now, I didn't know going in that Doug Jones played two characters in this movie. But when I saw those two characters, the Scarecrow and the Trickster, I was like, this was done by somebody competent. This was done by somebody professional. Mm-hmm. They didn't get some stuntman or a crew member to do these monsters. It was someone real, and sure enough, it was the great Doug Jones from Pan's Labyrinth. Mm-hmm. So it's the main character is an outcast, but he's a talented artist and makeup artist. I thought it was a really touching bond with his mom. It was actually a good chunk of the movie was a layered and dramatic coming of age film that turns into this insane Halloween craziness.
Okay, so I have mixed feelings about this movie. On the one hand, I get the coming of age aspects, and I actually really do like the lead actor, Caleb Thomas. I felt some of the drama of him being picked on felt, I don't know if hokey is the word, but it seemed a little bit overplayed to me at times, where some of it was too on the nose for my taste. It actually gives me the feeling of like a screenwriter consciously trying to delve into the tropes of a bullied, picked on kid, and I think some of it doesn't work, but I think it's still salvageable mostly because of the actor Caleb in the lead role. One of the things that does bother me as a horror fan in this movie is that Caleb is a nice kid. He's very sweet. He's obviously very talented. He's basically like a young Tom Savini or a Joe Castro or a Baker or somebody like that, like somebody with like that kind of imagination. And I'm not going to say how the movie ends, but it kind of, I feel like, fails the main character. Like, if you're going to make the main character in a horror movie somebody who would actually make horror movies, I feel like their ending should be a little bit better for the. I don't know what message, and I don't think it's a bad thing. It's just what message does that send to horror? Horror.
Yeah.
You expect him to be so much more, and then you see how his life actually turned out. I'm like, that's kind of lame. You would want him to at least for me, I was hoping to find out that after the events of this movie, he would go on to be a successful movie makeup artist, because that seems like that's where he was headed. And it sucks to have in a horror movie to have your main character be a diehard, misunderstood horror fan like that, and not give him a good send off or a good ending. So I didn't care for that aspect. So in the sense, the ending bothered me. However, on the other hand, these are spectacular set pieces. Like, my God. Like, just when I thought that this movie was like gonna lose me control, when it gets to the actual horror, the elaborate set pieces, the art direction, everything about it is really kind of incredible. Like, I'm really blown away by the level of artistry and detail that went into these really imaginative horror set pieces. Really dug everything involving the horror, everything involving the tricks and the trickster. So, like, the actual horror elements of it are kind of spectacular, actually. And what makes it more impressive, it's spectacular on what is obviously a very low budget. They really push the limits of what they can do with such a limited budget. And the horror elements in this, like I said, are so imaginative. It's almost like eye candy. Even if you're not gripped by the drama once it gets to a certain point, I think as a horror fan, it's kind of hard not to be entertained by all of the huge set pieces, which I loved all of those.
Yeah, that's why I thought it had a low budget indie spirit, but you could tell it was done by professionals because it was so solid, the makeup and the camera work and stuff during the horror scenes. And what I think felt disjointed about it is it set up the drama well, and I agree with you. It was a bit of a typical bullies against the strange kid story.
Yeah.
But as far as the way they handled it and the characters, I thought were really good, and the character interactions were really good. I like the family dynamic, but it sets you up for something that it doesn't deliver. It doesn't transition from the realistic drama of the family life into the fantastical. It's kind of the family drama, and all of a sudden it's fantastical.
It's not a smooth transition at all. And I think that's why I was able to be entertained by those aspects so separately from the rest of the movie. I almost felt like I was like mid-film, I was dropped into a more enjoyable horror movie. That's the best. It doesn't feel as organic as you'd hope. And it does show that it is made by talented filmmakers. If you're not really on board with the drama, if you stick with it, you will see some pretty spectacular sights and images. And, of course, Doug Jones. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Loved him as the trickster character.
And a great little Halloween movie. It's a good holiday movie for Halloween. And when the bullies come back to his house and it's all completely decked out in these crazy, weird Halloween decorations.
Everything about that is great. That whole section of the movie where they get back to the house and the bullies are seeing their worst fears and going into the different rooms. I have no complaints about any of that section of the movie. That is where, to me, the gold mine is in this movie. This is why you watch the movie. So you could get to that and you'll be blown. And I love the set piece with the stoner. I had to say that made me. Although there are occasional parts, and there's another movie I don't like. I think we did a 420 special here on this podcast, and we're pretty open. We're very we're pro marijuana advocates here on the Horror Show podcast. So sometimes when I see movies like this and the way that they treat people who smoke weed as like, oh, it's those kids smoking the pot outside and stuff like that, I'm like, what is this, like the 1950s? Like the references to like weed and drinking seem like it came from a completely different era than the one we actually lived in. Almost like they actually those kids smoking pot outside are fucking criminals and they're there to terrorize and pick on kids. I'm like, no, we're not. No.
Yeah.
Like that. That's one little problem. Like, it portrays it in a questionable manner, in my opinion. The way that the mom gets, oh, those bad kids outside, look what they're doing, smoking pot. I'm like,
Exactly.
they're bad because they're assholes to the kid. They're bad because they pick on him, not because they smoke weed. And realistically, if they did smoke weed, they'd probably be a little bit more relaxed and wouldn't be so concerned with picking
Yeah.
up a kid who is so obviously not their size.
Yeah.
Thoughts.
So you got the one kid smoking a joint with a Jack in the Box. It's a Jack in the Box that he's smoking a joint with.
That's
and
hilarious.
then you got the one kid chased by the guy with the pig head, and then you got the other one with the puppet master type of puppets. And I love when the puppets are just like entertaining him at first, and he's puppets, and then they kind of reach behind him and they cut their strings. I thought that was a really cool moment.
Like, am I high? Is this like a Cheech and Chong movie?
Yeah.
So there's a funny gag, like that's a funny gag with the weed, but it seems like this movie was made by people whose ideas of weed have not been updated since the 1950s. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah. And as good as the horror scene was when they get back to the house, I think that's when they kind of abandoned what they were doing in the other section of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of abandoned these characters, and there's no more character arc for anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And the girl that he had a crush on, I thought she started out as a very interesting character. And then when she was stuck in the middle of the horror, she just kept saying, let's just go. Let's just go. Let's just go. I was like, oh, come on, make her a real person. Keep her a real person when the horror is happening.
I didn't like the direction that they took her in because she started off as an interesting, likable character. And by the end, it was hard to care. And then her fate didn't work for me anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
The ending scene, which I'm not going to reveal what it is, just as a whole, does not work to me. Once all the spectacular fights and like the stuff inside the house is gone, and it goes to like the last scene, which takes place years later, none of it worked for me. It seemed pointless. The call at the ending, no explanation to why the nurse was so interested in one particular person. I'm not going to say what's going on. It seemed completely pointless. Like, I felt like you could have just cut out the entire last 10 minutes and figured out something completely different to do with it, because literally none of that worked for me at all. It was
because
ending.
You go from these great scenes where like the trickster turns into this evil thing, and then you see this giant spider and this big giant practical monster. I love seeing giant practical monsters in movies because you hardly don't see it anymore at all.
No, they pulled out all the stops for the horror elements.
But then, yeah, bit of a hokey ending, dude, for sure. With I won't say what it was, but naming a building Haddonfield.
Oh yeah, I thought.
And Dr. Curtis.
Yeah. See, I like when movies pay homage, and I don't mind when they do that. But there was something about so on the nose that even the way they say it's Haddonfield, like they make the character say it, where I'm like, most local people would just call it the fucking hospital. Like they're just like they're saying it like it's conscious that we're characters, we aware, the screenwriter is aware that you're aware of Halloween, and we want you to recognize it instead of making it more organic. It's stuff like that is like, there's a lot of things in this movie and the writing that I think are too on the nose. The way that if they just made it Haddonfield in a passing reference, but they had to make people say Haddonfield with some kind of emphasis, I'm like, we get it. We know. We get it. Halloween homage, we get it. We don't. Yeah,
that's one of a handful of times in this movie where I said, "Oh, that's too bad."
I appreciate what they're going for, and I get it, and I probably might do the same thing too. I mean, what horror fan doesn't want to slip in a reference to Halloween in a horror movie that takes place on Halloween? So I get that. I think it could have been smoother. That's all.
Yeah. So for me overall, it was a good Halloween movie, a solid beginning with good characters and dialogue, but it turns hokey and abandons the character arcs. But it's held together by great makeup effects and even some great CGI mixed in there that wasn't overkill. And then the great Doug Jones. He's just Doug Jones alone is worth watching this movie.
My assessment is that this is a rickety movie. It's all over the place and it's not fully successful. But when it's good, and when it's good is one particular section that's, I would say, is the middle section of the movie. When it works spectacularly well. So it's obvious this was made by very talented people. And I think that's what makes the movie worthwhile as a horror fan. Like, watch it so you get to the horror elements, and you'll kind of be blown away by how much effort, how much creativity and imagination is put into those aspects of the film. So it's
Definitely,
one
I
of those
agree.
weird cases where I didn't enjoy so much. I didn't enjoy about the movie, but one section of it is so spectacular that I think horror fans owe it to themselves to see, just to see what these guys pull off and to see the level of imagination that they have.
It almost seems like elements that are almost too good for this movie.
Exactly. And this one is, where did we watch this on?
This one's on Showtime. They have some pretty interesting picks on there.
I watched this on Showtime. I did watch this on Showtime. Okay, I was trying to figure out where I watched this at. I was like, how did I watch this movie? Okay, Showtime. So yeah, weird because these are both Random Acts of Violence and The Terror of Hallows Eve. Kind of like the same concept, and they both revolve around people who are into the horror genre. I have a poster that just fell. I apologize. What was I saying? Oh yeah, I was comparing these two movies. Both of them are movies that were the main character is somebody who is somewhat involved in horror in some form or another, and about their creations coming to life. But they are worlds apart. I think that the similarities pretty much end right there. And I think it's easy even for me to come to the conclusion that of these two, Random Acts of Violence is the superior film.
Definitely, I think so too.
But well worth a watch, both of them. Much more so Random Acts of Violence, though.
Yeah. And our final film for today is a brand new one that just hit Netflix. The Babysitter, Killer Queen is part 2 of McGee's Babysitter. He directed and co-wrote it. It's 2 years after the first Babysitter film. Cole is a freak in school because he told everyone what happened, and no one believes him. Soon, the death cult returns to finish what they started. Judah Lewis returns as Cole. Emily Allen Lind returns as Melanie. Bella Thorne, Andrew Batchelor, Robbie Arnell, and Hannah Mae Lee, and also Samara Weaving all return as the Satanic Death Cult. And then they added Jenna Ortega from, I think she's a Latina actress from Jane the Virgin, and she plays the rebel Phoebe.
She's kind of what made the movie for me, actually.
She did for a while, but she completely lost me once the horror came into play.
Mm-hmm.
I like her rebellious attitude, and I liked her what a smartass she was. And then she kind of turned into a Disney smartass for me at the end. She seemed like a Disney mean girl or something.
I could see that. So here's my issue with this movie. I have here's another one. I have weird mixed feelings about this movie. I like the original one a little more, for one thing. I do think the first one is better. And there was no point in this movie where I was never not entertained. I was never bored. It never lost my attention, and I was into it the whole way through. But at the same time, I never felt any sense of danger or any sense of anything. Everything about the movie feels so light and so fluffy. And mind you, it is an entertaining film. You'll be I was not bored, like I said, but some of it, all the writing feels so light and so fluffy that it all feels like a completely weightless horror movie, which is kind of weird because it's very gory. It's gory. There's blood splattering everywhere, and it's not a sanitized, the violence is not sanitized, yet it never really registered for me. It all seemed a bit too whimsical, and I didn't care for the writing style of it. I don't like it when, and this is a thing with movies, especially modern movies, where everybody talks like they're in Diablo Cody script. Everybody wants to do the Diablo Cody thing where everybody has hit comebacks, and they have there's a point when every character starts talking the same way with the same type of pithy comebacks and the same type of snippy dialogue. You could tell that it's the same voice coming out of all of these actors because it's the screenwriter. I don't feel like these people are actually characters. I could feel the screenwriter shoving this dialogue in everybody's mouth, and none of it ever really feels genuine to me. And weirdly enough, it's all actually kind of entertaining. It all had me with it the whole way through. but it just felt like such a weightless experience. I don't, in recent times, it's been a while since I've seen that type of movie where I'm into it the whole time, but it feels very throwaway. Something about it feels like throwaway, disposable.
Yeah, well, it was whimsical, but the first one had some whimsical elements too. But the first one also had some heavy things in there. They had some really good horror sequences. This one, I don't think it really had any good horror sequences at all. The only time the horror really reared its head is the gore. So it was like a completely whimsical movie, unrealistic movie, and then with a bunch of gore.
And what makes it even worse is, like, especially the first gore scene that happens, or a neck is ripped open. Fuck, it is graphic and blood's everywhere. But the reactions of the characters was like, "Oh, you just spilled this all over me," or like, I was like, okay, this is just, it's not a realistic reaction to that level of graphic violence. The way that everybody responds to every situation in like this cutesy manner, and everybody has this pop culture infused dialogue, and we're going to reference Kanye West, and we're going to reference this, and we're going to reference that. It seems like it's trying very hard to appeal to millennials and younger. And I don't mean that in that way, but it's just, it feels all fake to me. I don't know. None of it feels real. I could see that this was very much all, like, I never was like engaged with the story as a story. I could just feel the writer writing all of these things. And like I said, everybody talks the same, so there's not much to distinguish these characters because they all have the same type of smart-assy, quippy attitude. So there's not much to differentiate. It was too light for me. Like,
it was...
Gory scenes like that should register, even in a horror comedy like The Evil Dead 2, which is probably the king of horror comedies. Those horror scenes work really well, but they never undercut the comedy. This is just... They never got the gore or the horror elements to work or function the way that good horror should function.
Yeah, it was completely bloated with pop culture references and bloated with references to other movies.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, the different supporting characters, like the therapist, the teacher, store clerks, everyone talks like a smartass, and no one talk like the therapist. No therapist would talk like that therapist talked, even though he was funny. And the teacher, no one would talk to the kids like that teacher does.
I hate shit like that. Like, I don't like when movies do that. I think that, like, a movie like Juno Diablo Cody, which is I mentioned earlier. I don't know why, but she has something special where I think that she can actually get away with that in her scripts and movies like that. Or Jennifer's Body. I feel like when other people try to imitate that style, it's so self-aware that it kind of gets on my nerves. And it also reminds me of, you ever heard the show Californication on Showtime with David Duchovny? So the idea of that show was that David Duchovny is like this player, the sexaholic. He's constantly getting pussy. Women are always tossing themselves at him because he's a writer or something like that. And he's like dirty-minded and very sexual, but the doctors talk like that. Oh, it looks like you got your dick fucked. Like, they say weird things. I'm like, this isn't the fucking real world. Why does everybody sound like they're written by the same person? I can't stand that shit in movies and in television. When it's so obvious that the dialogue is all coming from one person to everybody basically has the same voice. Yeah.
And then it has a lot of good elements, like especially the kills. You got the blowtorch scenes, the surfboard decapitation, the boat motor kill, the bodies exploding, getting stabbed, severed limbs. But then you have the disco montage was lame. At least half of the flashbacks were lame. And then the fight with the rebel girl at the end, complete with the rebel girl like making a fireball and throwing it.
Phoebe.
Phoebe, when she made that fireball and threw it, it completely lost me after that.
You know what it was? It was like, I could see like, here's another movie that's kind of like that, but it works a lot better too, is Scott Pilgrim versus the World. I could actually see some of Scott Pilgrim versus the World influence on it, especially when that fight scene, I already got the vague feeling off of it, but that fight scene confirmed it. where in Scott Pilgrim versus the World, when Michael Cera starts battling with Ramona Flowers' evil exes, it becomes like a video game with different like very video game-ish. But that movie had such a unique style that it was committed to, that it seemed like it took place in Scott Pilgrim versus the World takes place in a universe all its own.
Yeah.
And because its style is so flamboyant and it's obviously not our reality, it works. I feel like if you want to do like those flourishes like that and do that, you have to commit to it a little bit more. Otherwise, like when your film is half committed to the real world, half committed to smarkiness, and then partially committed to like some kind of video game unrealistic aesthetic. I'm like, if you wanted to make that fight scene work, the movie needed to function in a completely different way before that. You needed to go more all out. Otherwise, by the time that scene shows up, it just seems kind of strange, out of place, and a little bit forced. So this does a lot of what I could see that it's trying to do what Diablo Cody does. It does a movie like Scott Pilgrim versus the World. This kind of quirky, quippy movies, but it just does not. It doesn't work the way those movies do. I don't think it has that last. And as it was when it was over, I was like, okay. I mean, I wasn't not enjoying it while I was watching it necessarily. I'll put it that way. I wasn't like, this sucks or this is boring or didn't lose my attention, but I don't know.
Yeah, it tries to ground itself a couple times, but it doesn't try hard enough. I mean, just don't try to ground yourself at all. If you're going to do a movie this fantastical, don't try to ground it at all. Just make it all craziness like that, you know?
If you're going to do that, commit to it.
Yeah.
Like half-hearted surrealism or half-hearted stylization. If you're actually going to commit to your style, you might as well go all out.
Yeah. Well, for me, overall, that final twist at the end, they completely abandoned anything good about Samara Weaving's character. I didn't like the final twist, and it's a film that cares more about jokes and zany comedy horror than it does about the characters. So for me, it was a little funny, a little gory, a little fun, and a little contrived.
Yeah, I guess that's a good way to sum it up. I'd say it's a fun experience while you're watching it, and then it kind of like evaporates from your mind, and then the longer it goes on, the more you start to see the holes being poked through this movie. And one last thing, one thing I do want to say is Jenna Ortega as Phoebe. She started off, like you said, good, and then she became kind of like a Disney smartass by the end. She is what made this movie more tolerable to me. I like her character, and I think she did a good job. I think where the character goes wrong is something that's completely beyond the actress's control, because at a certain point, you can only do so much with the part that you're given, with the lines that you're given, with the script that you're given. She tries, but it doesn't work. I don't think that's her fault, though, at the end. That's just because the writing gets too self-consciously hip that it loses a lot of its steam. So I think she did a really good job with such a limited part, and really, I don't know, she injected something into the movie for me to care about a little bit more when she first appeared, when she was initially first on there. So she's definitely a talented actress, and she definitely does elevate the movie, but her performance is handicapped by the script that she has to work with.
Yeah, I did like her character a lot, and I did like her performance. It's just that, you know, the potential that character had, they just pissed away by the end of it, and they'd done a poor attempt at making her a badass, I think is what I was getting from it.
Yeah. So I would describe this more as a curiosity than anything. I wouldn't say I recommend this movie, because for one, if I want to recommend a movie, there's so many movies out there. I think I'd rather recommend one that I know is really, really good. So I'm not going to recommend this movie, but I will say it's a curiosity. You might be interested if you saw the first one, obviously, and you liked it, you're probably going to want to see the sequel. And if you're into that type of, you know, the style of writing, there are people who like this type of stuff, this quippy, millennial, smartassery. If you're into that, then you might like this movie. So, I mean, check it out if you're inclined to, but don't go out of your way to seek this out. That's what I would say.
Yeah,
I was happy to see Samara Weaving return. It was ultimately wasted.
I know they totally waste her character, dude. She wasn't anything like she was, and it almost seemed like they just brought her in just
to say they had her in it.
Yeah, just to say that they brought her in.
Yeah,
because she was the best part of the first one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she was. She was. Yeah. Oh, and another thing, Jordan Lewis was also good as Cole. I liked him. He had a good performance.
Yeah.
I think it's him and Jenna Ortega. Those two are for me the standouts in the acting in this movie. They did a good job with what they were working with.
Yeah, the actors were definitely better than the movie on this one.
Yeah, agreed. And one last thing, I keep saying one last thing. I don't know how many times I've said that on this podcast. But when your characters have the ability to come back over and over again, there's almost no point in killing anybody off, because you know that they can just return out of no time when the story has no consequences. And that's another way where this feels light. The fact that the characters get reincarnated and then reincarnated again. I'm like, really? They get eviscerated graphically like twice and they're still here? Like, why even bother with those scenes at all if you're just going to fucking shove them back in no matter what you do to them?
Yeah, and
that's supposed to be some kind of commentary on slasher movies and be back. I'm not convinced that the movie is even exploring anything like that, so I think you'd have to be reading in to even see that kind of subtext anyway.
Yeah. There's no element of danger because the villains can't die, and then you think maybe the victims can die, but they all of a sudden they start throwing fireballs, so... Nah.
Yeah. So a little sad because I was hoping for a little bit more out of this movie. Like I said again, it's not a bad movie, and I kind of enjoyed it while it was on. It's too lightweight. All the movies we have to discuss for you today. These are all fairly new movies. Random Acts of Violence and Babysitter Killer Queen are both new to streaming services, 2020 movies. And The Terror of Hallows Eve is not too old either. It's from 2017. Check us out on Facebook, facebook.com/Pickles Horror Show. Check us out on Instagram, @Pickles Horror Show. Where else can they check us out, Michael?
And you can find links to everything, everywhere our podcast is, and all our social media at flow.page/Ghostman Rivera.
And we'll put that in the podcast description. Till next week, folks, happy horror.
Happy horror.